Welcome to Hekman Research 101, where you can start learning the practices of a wise scholar along with your Hekman Research librarians. Today we're talking about evaluation for personal research, or everyday evaluation. In our other videos about evaluation, we talked about the importance of context. We often think of evaluating in the academic context, such as working on a research project for school, but there's also the personal context of ordinary life, such as just scrolling through our online feeds. We use information to make everyday choices all the time, often through the lens of what we already know and believe, and we find that information all around us, mostly through popular sources. Remember, popular source here refers to content written for a popular audience, or the average reader, like magazines, novels, blogs, websites, social media, etc. Popular sources are designed to draw in readers and keep them interested, so they'll often have attention-grabbing headlines and images, everyday language that may even be entertaining or provocative, and content that's delivered in easily digestible chunks. In comparison, scholarly works like academic books and journals are usually designed for scholarly readers, who maybe aren't as concerned with aesthetic visuals or fun writing. With scholarly research, the importance of evaluating sources is obvious. It's required for most academic work. In everyday life, no one is grading you on your use of information, so we may not invest so much time on it. The problem is, this is a way that some sources can take advantage of their readers. Fake news or misinformation can cause a lot of problems because we don't always realize how we're being influenced by untrustworthy sources. So that is why evaluation is still important even if you're not an academic researcher. We can all be more alert to the ways in which we find and use information. One particular point of importance in evaluation for everyday life is looking out for bias. In our Understanding Evaluation lesson, we talked about evaluating sources on 3 scales: relevance, expertise, and bias. They're all important factors, but in personal evaluation, we need to dig a little deeper to consider the sometimes hidden priorities of different sources, or their biases. We may be tempted to think how we find information and how information is presented to us is just a coincidence. However, there are no accidents in the world of information. First, how we come across a source is not an accident. Information is created for many reasons, but for most cases, profit and visibility are part of the ultimate priority. More clicks, more likes, more shares, more purchases are how most popular sources stay in business. So they invest a lot in their marketing, paying for prime space online and for sponsorship by well-known names. Sources we might otherwise interpret as relevant or objective may in fact be part of a bias system. For example, we can talk about bias in search engines such as Google. When we make a search, the first results we see are the most viewed sources, not the most correct or most useful necessarily. And many sources pay Google to be shuffled in closer to the top because they know most readers online don't go past the first page or 2 of sources. Second, how information is presented to us is not an accident. Popular sources want to encourage their readers and keep their sponsors happy, which can often mean they will present information in ways they think will conform to their views. This can lead to misleading headlines or content that only shares part of the story or only from a certain perspective. Bias like this can be deliberately manipulative, but almost everyone has the potential for bias because we all have our own views, which might affect how we share ideas or issues. For example, there's a plethora of news sources online, and some have more or less obvious bias toward left and right-wing politics. Sometimes you have to compare multiple sources in order to see the differences in how they're reporting a story. And there's one other thing that isn't an accident when it comes to information: how we respond to and use it. We all have our own beliefs and values, which can sometimes find support or conflict in the headlines we view or the posts we click on. We can often end up creating a kind of echo chamber, aggravating our own biases when we avoid or reject information that does not fit our pre-existing ideas. To see that, you need only look at how social media platforms like Facebook work. Facebook tracks whatever you like, view, or share, and feeds you more similar content in the hopes that you will continue to like, view, or share. Before we know it, we're seeing a lot of news stories from the same source, or a lot of the same views. And if we're not careful, we can start to assume that this is just how everyone thinks, rather than a self-fulfilling bias. So, considering all this, how do we evaluate bias in everyday information use or personal research? Let's think about those 3 areas of concern. How did I find this information? How is it being presented to me? And what is my response? For the first question, look at web addresses or about pages for information on the source. What are their values and how might that influence this information I'm getting from them? Also, look at your discovery method. Did I find this using a search engine, social media, etc.? And might there be any underlying biases there? Next, consider how the source is designed. Look at the visuals, photos, cartoons, ads, infographics, and how they are being used to engage my attention. Look also at the writing, the kind of language or tone they are using. Entertaining or persuasive language is common with popular sources, but playing on readers' feelings with inflaming language may be a clue that there is manipulative bias at work. Finally, think about those feelings the information inspires. Is my first instinct to anger or fear? And what might those feelings signify about my unspoken values or beliefs? Sometimes it's necessary to take a step back until you can calmly analyze your response for any personal bias and find room to consider other voices and perspectives. In the end, everyday evaluation just takes an extra measure of discernment to consider the influences of popular sources and whether their priorities make them a trustworthy foundation for your personal decisions. As always, the library has the resources and skills to help you evaluate your sources, personal or academic. You can chat with a librarian about evaluation or schedule a research appointment today by visiting the Hekman Library website, library.calvin.edu. Also, check out our YouTube channel anytime to see our essential tech tip videos and learn more research basics with Hekman Research 101.